I don't know about you, but if you have ever walked into a meeting knowing it is going to be tough, that you feel that knot in your stomach that carefully, and then you carefully choose your words. And as leaders, it happens very often that conversations, tough conversations, are unavoidable. But they're also the key to unlocking a truly thriving culture. Today, we are going to be discussing about the challenges and of the tough discussions. And research shows that most of us struggle with tough conversations. In fact, studies show that over 70% of employees avoid difficult discussions altogether. And there is close to 53% of people who deal with toxic situations by simply ignoring these tough conversations. And well, we have to accept it. That's a recipe for disaster, right? But what if those conversations, the one we dread, were actually the key to building stronger teams, resolving conflict, and creating a culture of openness and trust? That's what we are going to be discussing today with our guest, Chris Dyer, who is a CEO, a best-selling author, a leadership speaker who knows a thing or two about building credible company cultures. And he's led multiple companies to be recognized as best practice, best workplaces, and even landed on Inc. magazine fastest growing list 5 times. Chris is here to share his secrets to successful tough conversations, and even to discuss a little bit more about this world of remote work. Chris, it's a pleasure to have you here today. And I'm very curious about how did you end up working, discussing and working about work culture? How did you convert yourself to this world?
Well, I think like anybody, you're either exposed to it or you're terrible at it and you have to fix it. And so I was the latter, that we had a bad culture. I didn't mean to have a bad culture. I just was doing what I thought I was supposed to do. And, my leadership style was some weird combination of my teachers, my parents, and my coaches, which does not transfer very well to, grown adults in a company that's growing and thriving. And so I sort of said to myself one day, like, I'm going to change the culture. I'm going to make it better. And the next question was, well, what am I supposed to do? What does that blueprint look like? If you look at sports, you might study what plays or what formations a team maybe has done. You might look at their strategies or their, maybe their strength trainings program. You might look at, those things as inspiration. And I was struggling to find a clear blueprint as to what I was supposed to do. So I went on this journey of let's figure it out. Let's test. Let's figure it out. Let's talk to great companies. I interviewed thousands of senior leaders and just finding the smartest people in the room at every conference and just berating them with questions to ultimately find out that there were these truths that kept coming up over and over and over again that was very clear about what we're supposed to do. But what was also very clear is that most people don't realize it, they don't prioritize it, and if they do, their companies are doing really, really well. So, it's a bit like waking up one day and saying, I'm fat. I guess I better learn how to exercise, or I better learn how to eat better. I think I was in the same predicament. We're screwed up. How do I get better?
Chris, what is funny is that I completely relate with you regarding that there is building an excellent work culture is a path of discovery that you cannot, it's not enough to listen to good speakers reading tons of books because you have to experiment because there is an adaptation process to every different scenario. What works for Disney will not work for my company or for another company. And people do not realize, and maybe that's the thing that makes people scared about the big change of culture is because there is no ultimate recipe. It's about iterations of small little steps. And sometimes these steps are very, very small that
Yeah.
provides the big changes for the long term. That I'm completely with you.
the,
I
the the building blocks are there, right? So those are consistent. I mean, if you want to know how to make a cookie, we're going to use flour. And there are some basic things that we're probably going to do, right? That will be common amongst all cookies. But to your point, how do you make it yours?
Mm,
Do you want a chocolate chip cookie? Do you want to have caramel in there? Do you want to put sprinkles? Like, I don't know. Like, there's a customization that has to go through and a preference that you have to figure out. And so my book was all about how do I give you what are those basic, those very high level things that are going to be consistent amongst all great companies. And then how do you actually put it into place in a very granular way? And that's what you were saying, and really making it work for you, because you're right. Let's just say one of my pillars is transparency. How Disney might be transparent inside their organizations can be very different than a company of 10 people,
mm.
but the idea is still the same.
Absolutely. So, and you explore quite deeply these principles in your book about work culture. In fact, I think that you have like seven different principles that you have, in fact, where you have a structured information, and these principles is are not like the magic wand, but it is the path that you have to step one after the other in order to build that excellence in work culture. Can you briefly summarize to me these seven principles that you use in your book?
Yeah, so the greatest companies in the world, the greatest cultures, all consistently do these seven things really, really well. They're transparent. They know how to measure what matters. They
Mm,
celebrate what makes us unique, whether that's their unique proposition or marketing or what makes employees unique, but they understand the concept of uniqueness. How do we differentiate ourselves and all of that? They're good listeners. They have a recognition program, and they ultimately have a positive way to deal with mistakes
mm,
that then leads to more innovation, right? So that they are ultimately creating that space and that it's okay to try new things, to experiment, to figure things out, and ultimately maybe screw up and fail, and then learn from that and then move on. And there's some really great examples of that. But um, those are the seven things that we see that they do consistently. Good companies might do three or four of those well, right? And maybe fail at some of the other ones, and that's why they never hit the great. That's why they're never a market leader. That's why they're never the top, two or three companies in their industry. And of course, bad companies are doing none of them, right? And going out of business or barely holding on or whatever.
Chris, one of my favorite steps that you have mentioned is this story about uniqueness. And it's often forgotten that uniqueness is not about the business outcome, it's about what may cause you and me like click. It's kind of the rituals that we have in a family. It's kind of the rituals that we will have when we know each other so well that we know that when we are together we're going to be chit-chatting,
Yeah,
whatever it is. And that little small thing is often forgotten because we think that no, we need to be a little bit more aligned with the consulting industry or with the pharma industry. And what the hell? That doesn't make you feel like you are part of it, right? It needs to be the
right.
dumb things that we do in a couple, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And if we can really lean into what makes us special, what makes us unique, what makes our employees unique, what makes our clients unique, what makes our vendors unique, our product and our service, so the place in which we're doing it, how we're doing it. We're talking about all that stuff, and it solves your marketing problem, it solves your positioning problem, it solves your diversity, equity, and inclusion problem. It solves everything around when we get really curious about what makes us all unique.
Hmm. Coming back to two other of the pillars of your framework, your seven pillars that you have mentioned in your book on work culture, you have highlighted also transparency in dealing with mistakes, which bring us a little bit more closer to our topic today. Because today I would like to discuss about this this culture defining skills, which is decoding tough conversations, and especially for leaders. And I wanted to ask you, many leaders avoid these tough conversations. In your experience, what are the clearest signs that a tough conversation is absolutely necessary? Because sometimes it might not be necessary, and we are just having ideas in our head very quickly. So, what signs do we have that we need to have these tough conversations?
Well, if we're avoiding it, we need to have it. I mean, that's the first and foremost. If it's occupying space in your brain and you're avoiding it, then the sooner you go and do it, the better off you're going to be and the organization's going to be. Often where leaders struggle is, and it's not, I shouldn't just say leaders, everyone, when we talk about mastering tough conversations, is that they are not prepared. And so we're trying to navigate a conversation that is not as easy as the other conversations we do every day without preparing. And so I often say, like, can you imagine if you and I went to go play basketball in the backyard, right? We're we're not spring chickens anymore. We probably haven't played much basketball. You and I could probably go in the backyard and have fun, and one of us is going to win, and like that's it. But if one of us is going to go play against LeBron James, and then suddenly that there's money on the game on it, right? Or we're going to go play soccer with Messi, and there's money on the table. There's an outcome, right? We had better go practice. We better prepare. We better study. We better do something to not get completely obliterated in this interaction, right? And so sometimes you have this really difficult client, a bully. Maybe you have an employee that you really struggle to align with. You have a spouse who you've been fighting with, like whoever that person is, you can't just show up and go play, a fun pickup conversation with them, a fun pickup game. You've got to prepare. You've got to think about it. You've got to know what you want to do, what you don't want to do. You have to be very clear about what the outcome should be and what the boundaries are and when is it maybe not okay anymore? When is it an out of bounds conversation? So when we do that, when we think about all of these things, suddenly the conversation's not so hard anymore. I'm not going to say it's easy, but it's not as hard as we have built it up in our head.
Hmm. So are you saying, like, I'm trying to think a little bit, and I always relate the stuff to my personal relationship with my wife. So sometimes we have these biases, like things that are bugging us from someone, but it might not be important. Should we voice and have a tough conversation out of something that is just bugging us because of our biases or because of our beliefs? And it might not be that important. Is it important to have these tough conversations in any case?
I think so. Now, there is a big difference between those conversations that are intimate conversations, so with your spouse, with your best friend, with your family, your kids. I think those are a different category than the conversations we're having at work. And,
Mm,
whether or not, is it really worth it to have that conversation about that one thing that your wife always does that annoys you that's probably never going to change? Like, that's a
yeah.
whole other thing than having this conversation with someone who's maybe keeps alienating clients and we've been and it's costing us money and there could be something else where we could do something about it.
Mm,
um a friend of mine who's a great therapist, I heard her say the other day on a TikTok or something. She said, try this little strategy out with your spouse, which is, hey, can I complain for a moment without judgment? Meaning, can I just tell you like what's bothering me? I'm not, there's no judgment. I'm not blaming you. I'm not like coming at you. I'm just want to like complain for a second, right? And vent or whatever. And so sometimes, and even that's a little bit of a strategy of how do you express yourself and get it out there without creating a fight, without creating another thing, right? But again, that's a preparation, that's a strategy. We put something in place to come in and try to, you know, drives me nuts that you come home and you dump all your stuff all over the house or whatever, right? Or you don't clean up your dishes or whatever. And it could just be, I just want to complain for a second. Like I need to do my work and I feel like all this stuff is all of a sudden everywhere when you come home and it throws me off, right? Or whatever. Whatever the little fight is about. But again, there's still a strategy there.
mm. Have you been discussing with my wife, by the way? Because she tells me exactly the same.
Some things are
Um,
always universal. Yes.
is there situations where we need to have like proactive, tough conversations to prevent bigger issues down the road? And is it different than the straight ahead, visually behavioral discussion on tough conversations?
Yeah, I mean, so there are a lot of times, a great benefit in having that conversation sooner than later, so that we don't allow things to build up and resentments and things like that. However, I'm also not for the immediate knee jerk. I'm immediately angry or I'm immediately upset and I'm immediately going to go and tell that person, right? So there's some balance in there between, okay, I didn't like what happened there. I need to have a conversation with them, but I need a moment to get myself in the right space. I need to think about what I want to say. I need to think about how to put it in terms that benefit the other person, right? What's in it for them in what we're going to talk about, not just, well, I don't want you to do that and stop being a jerk to me. And, but, thinking about it, looking at this situation through their eyes and, having a little bit of time to be ready to have a good conversation. So there's a balance between the immediate and then avoiding and putting it off till later. It sits somewhere in that, maybe not the middle, but a little bit closer to the front side of that.
While you were describing this moment of just taking some seconds, trying to clearing your mind, I was thinking about mindfulness. Now, what is your thought about the use of mindfulness in order to be better at having tough conversations? Is it something that you would use, or do you think that that's something that for somebody else?
No, I think mindfulness is great. I would say the mantra that I always remind myself of in every difficult interaction with somebody, because ultimately a difficult conversation is with a difficult person or someone we perceive as a difficult person.
Mhm.
Um, and this mantra has served me very, very well. So if you take nothing else, anybody who's listening takes nothing else from this podcast, take this home with you. When you go to have that conversation with someone, do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?
Mm.
And if your answer is, I want to be right, if that's what you care about and you can't get past being right, your problem is never going to go away here. You will never solve this issue with that other person because you can be right, right? And nothing changes. I mean, for God's sakes, look at politics. Both sides both think they're right, and nothing ever
Mm.
changed, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not about being right. And if you need this, just say, yes, you're right. Okay, you're the right, you're the perfect person. Great. But let's put that aside for a second. But now, how do I be effective? How do I create a solution? How do we have a conversation? How do I figure out with this person how we're going to move forward and coexist? Because if you're stuck on the I'm going to be right, then the moment that that person disagrees with you and you can't get past that, the relationship just completely disintegrates, right, into nothing. So we have to figure out how to be effective and be willing to understand that we might think they're right and we might think we're right and they might think they're right, but how do we do something different, right?
I love this, and indeed, it's something that I will take. I have taken note, in fact, about do I want to be right or do I want to be effective? I think that if we had this moment of reflection before any tough discussions, a lot of the problems in corporations and in the world could be definitely be solved. Um, that brings me to the human aspect of a discussion. So uh, we are often, as human beings, we have a bunch of common cognitive biases that often derail our tough conversation. Like you have mentioned, being right or effective because of our ego, simply as that. And there is other cognitive biases, confirmation biases, anchoring biases that can affect this discussion. What have you observed? What can we do about it? How can we be mindful that we have these biases and that it's going to make it tough if we don't acknowledge them?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we all have to acknowledge that we have biases, and that's just, I guess, part of the human condition. We all have our own unique experiences. We see the world, we are traveling through the world in our own way, which naturally gives us our own biases, right? On politics, on religion, on
Mm.
weather, on location, countries. I mean, whatever it is, your experience is going to in some way shade your perspectives. And that's why it's so important that we think about what's in it for the other person. What do they think? How are they viewing the situation? How might they perceive me coming to them? And because we, as best we can, think about who they are, what they value, what their biases might be. And we end up finding out, and this is a good thing about humanity, is that we mostly agree on most things. We actually are far more in common and agree on far more than when we don't. Yet it seems like, right, there's a perception is that we're all disagreeing all the time, but we actually agree on most things. Or else our society wouldn't exist. We couldn't even be here having this conversation, right? If we couldn't figure these things out, figure out most of the most important things.
You say our society wouldn't exist. Sometimes I think it is luck that we still exist.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chris, that was my negative moment. um, the one size doesn't fit all is something that we have that we all understand. So how can leaders adapt their communication style in tough conversations to effectively connect with the different personality types? So how can they adapt to the personalities? How much should we know the other person in order to say, then my language, my actions, or the way I'm going to communicate it is going to be different?
Yeah, I mean, I often say one size fits one, and so we have to think about sort of two things. One, how do we highlight and do what we do best? Really being clear and understanding what makes us tick. Like, am I a really good writer or I'm a really good orator or am I really good, like am I better off trying to talk to someone to have a conversation or am I a really good writer? Maybe I'm better off putting it in writing. Like figuring out who I am and knowing like what my strengths are and trying to lean on those strengths can really be helpful first. All right. And avoiding those things where I'm a little bit weaker. Um, Secondly, if you're able to, if you have enough access and time in a situation or relationship that you can try to fine tune and try to change a little bit to really wrap around what that person's strengths are, then that's great. We brought up our families and spouses before. I mean, you clearly know like how to be effective with your spouse, but would you take that same time and effort if you had a small disagreement with your neighbor who lived like three streets over or something? I mean, right, there's a different level of there. So in that instance, when suddenly that person is a little bit farther away from you on an intimacy level, and I don't mean intimacy and romance, but just in the amount of frequency that you have with them, um, you have to decide how much to lean into their what they need versus what you're good at. And so I find that the farther away, if I'm going to suddenly interact with someone a little bit, then I'm going to lean into where I'm really strong so I can try to be as effective as possible. And if it's someone I work with all the time, maybe it's someone I manage, who's on my team of five senior leaders, I know them really, really well, and I know what makes them tick, and I know how to deliver a message to them that's going to really resonate to them because I know who they are, and I've spent time with them. We've done that deep stuff. So there's some balance, right? I'm kind of giving everyone like spectrum, a lot of spectrum stuff here today, but like you got to figure out where you are on each of the.
Chris, so if I understand correctly, um, it is important to have a solid self-awareness in order to be effective in these tough discussions. But I have seen and observed very often that the tough discussions sometimes are discussions where you mentioned that we lean on on what we are good at, but sometimes we lean on our power. So if I'm the boss, so I rely on my power to say the things as they are, but is that effective? Is that in fact, does it show a good level of self-awareness regarding who we are and what the other person is? Uh, is it wrong to use our power, our hierarchy, in order to influence a tough discussions?
Sometimes. So when we're talking about the big things, then if you're the leader, if you're the CEO, if you're in charge, then you need to step up and set that direction and be very clear about what's expected and what we're doing and what we're not doing, right? So if it's a big deal, it's a big thing, you should step up and be big. That's why you're the leader. That's why you're there. That's, doesn't mean you don't listen. It doesn't mean you don't, you know, foster a way to hear all voices. But like in the end, that's your job to make that final decision, be very clear, be very confident, and give people that lessening of anxiety because they're like, okay, well, Ivan says what we're doing, and we all talked about it, but he said this is what we're doing, so that's what we're doing, right? And there's no more worrying about what the decision is because you've been very clear. On the flip side, when we're talking about the little things, that's when, as leaders, we need to shut up. Because if it's something little and it doesn't matter, to us. It doesn't ultimately matter to the larger strategic thing, but it's a small thing that has to be decided. That's when we shut up, let them do it, let them make the decision, let them, have that moment, let them to give their opinions and begin to practice and try and figure out how to, have their own voice in those moments. I think this is where leaders really fail, is they are constantly interrupting, constantly being the one to share, constantly being the one to make the decision. I've made this. This was my big issue, is I was making all of the decisions, and it created a culture where nobody made any decisions, no one had any innovation, nobody ever came to me with an idea, because why would you? Chris was
Mm.
the idea guy. I'm the go do what Chris told me to do guy, right? And I wanted people giving me great ideas, but I hadn't created that environment because I was making every decision.
Mm.
So you have to figure out when is the right and the wrong time to do that.
We have all gone through this learning process. Sometimes it is quite painful because we pay the price. As you say, that if we want to have innovation and it's coming from one person and people are not coming with innovation, we feel frustrated. People leaves jobs because of that specific situation. Um, I wanted to ask you, so you have mentioned that we should aim for an effective, tough discussion. What effective should look like at the end of a tough conversation? How does it look like? What are the action or steps leaders should aim to leave with at the end of this discussion?
Well, we have to determine what it is we want. And that's one of the most important things. We also to again figure out what that other person might want and
Mm,
what they're going to view as a success. It's important that we think about what our baggage is, like what are the things that maybe we're showing up with that aren't so good. Maybe we did yell and scream at them in that one interaction, or maybe, I don't know, that we worked on a project together, didn't go very well. Like, what is it that we're a little worried about? What do we think they're worried about? And then, again, what's the problem? What's the thing that's the issue? And then, how do we then start that conversation to drive towards what we want? Again, as long as what we want is in the general scope of what that person is going to want too, right?
mhm,
So, I mean, if you and I are working together and we're coworkers, and I come to you to have a conversation, and what I want is for you to quit because I can't stand you, that's not going to work, right? That's not a very reasonable thing. But what if I want for us to do is to, like, create a different set of boundaries so we can coexist here, or come up with a better way to communicate with each other, or whatever the thing is that's going to help me eliminate some of that issue. That's how we have to think about it and reframe it. But that's why we need time to plan and to think through that. So ultimately, did the issue get better,
uh-huh,
right? Are we seeing an improvement? I think that's probably your baseline of that. And do I really understand the other person's perspective? And did I allow them the opportunity to understand mine?
mm. So ultimately, it's not having what I want initially, but a solution. So something that move us from the current situation to a new situation, but it might be a solution that we both come up with. It doesn't mean that whatever I imagine as a potential outcome should be that in order to be that we are satisfied about the tough discussion.
Yeah, and often it's just really understanding the other person can help us get there.
Mm.
So we have to get curious and try to understand why they're doing whatever it is they're doing that's driving us crazy. You know, what's happening, who are they? I once had a head of my customer service team and my number one salesperson were totally fighting, and they got to the point where it was so bad and they were so just angry at each other that I had to get involved. And so I brought them together in a room. I had had them each take a personality test, a disc assessment in advance. And I shared that disc assessment. They knew each other's results, but then I had them share, like, so they knew their results, and then I had them read each other's results. And I sat in the room, and the only thing I said is, you're not allowed, the only thing you can do is say what you think the other person is thinking based on what they had read. And what they had read, they realized how they had been messing up their communication with each other. They actually got along. They actually later on were great friends and got along very, very well. But like the salesperson, if you look at their disc, it said they hate chit chat. They want to get right to business. They get on the call, they want to get right to the heart of it. They want to talk about the issue. They don't want to spend time talking about their kids and their dogs and all that stuff at the beginning of a conversation. The head of customer service, he loves chit chat. That chit chat is his number one thing. I mean, he's on the phone with customers all day long. He loves chit chat. So he realized every time their relationship got worse, he was trying to do more chit chat in order to build a relationship, to somehow fix the problem. And now he's driving that other person crazy because they're just like, I only want to talk to you and you won't talk to me about the issue. Let's figure out the thing and I can go on my way and go sell, you know. So the moment they started to understand each other, then it was super easy for the customer service person to get right into business. But then at the end, they had a moment because now they started to like each other. They actually would chit chat at the end, right? It was just moving it around, and it was just about them understanding each other and how they tick, and that ended up changing the whole relationship.
It is a very nice story because I was planning to ask you some example, but that shows exactly the point about the tough discussions that it's not sometimes about the content itself. It is about the different perspectives that we have or personalities that can influence the lenses that we put towards maybe the same thing that we both want, but packaged in a different manner. And yeah, that's what makes human relationships at the same time impressive and sometimes very difficult,
Yeah.
Chris. um, I guess that being in front of a tough discussion, tough conversation, is not something that if I have tomorrow a tough conversation, I can be ready. I guess that it will benefit of having a little bit of preparation, like like going to the gym, doing mini exercises every time in order to be ready to these tough discussions. Do you have any resources or tools that leaders can use to improve their ability in a small manner, like building micro habits, so that they can be ready for the future? Would you mind sharing a little bit of your good tips with us?
Yeah, I mean, certainly I mentioned it before, but taking some sort of personality test to better understand you is really important because most of them, I mean, DISC is probably the best for this, will tell you exactly where you shine and where you tend to struggle.
Hmm.
And so that will give you a clear understanding of what you should be thinking about. Now, I'm not a big advocate of working on things that you're weak at. If you're naturally not, just based on your upbringing and where you are today, you're a, let's say, 40 or 50 something year old executive, and you know your whole life you've been pretty terrible in this one area, Like there's only so much you're going to be able to do to get better at that. So it's almost like leaning more on your strengths, right? To how can you do more of where you are strong, and can you outsource or can you do something different, have somebody else handle some other part where you're weak at where maybe they're strong. You know, for example, if you're not a very good public speaker, no one should be sending you to go talk in front of a thousand clients, right? I mean, you can go work at it, and I'm sure you can get a little bit better at public speaking, but I'll bet you there's someone in your company who's really good at public speaking. They should go do it, right? Maybe you're really good at one-on-one communication, and you should spend more time doing that and let somebody else do the thing you're not good at. So there's a really figuring that out is so key. Um, there are times, there are things you do need to get better at. That's just a part of your job, and that's great. You can do it. You know, in your marriages, in your close relationships, you do have to work on those things you're weak at. But I find at work, there's usually somebody else who can do that thing for you, who will do it a thousand times better than you.
Mm,
Um, you know, number two, make sure that you are just having, just doing the preparation. The habit is do a slight preparation before every conversation.
mm.
Um, maybe not the ones that you know are super easy with that great client you've had for 25 years. That no problem. Okay, fine. But like anybody else, what do they want? What do I want? What's the problem we're trying to solve on this call? You know, what are we trying to get to? What's the script? What are some of the questions I might ask? Right, writing all that out in advance, it takes you like 5 minutes, will really set you up to navigate that conversation in the right way. Otherwise, the other person is navigating that conversation and you're just reacting the whole time to whatever they're saying. So if you need to achieve a specific outcome or create that conversation, you need to try to guide that conversation with some premeditated, you know, thought about how that's going to happen. So I think if you do those two things, that will really help. And the last thing is find somebody, you know, an accountability partner or you know, a close coworker who's in a lot of meetings with you, somebody whose opinion you trust, who is willing to tell you when you're being an idiot. And go to them after all these meetings and say to them, I need you to be my, I have a blind spot. I sometimes can do this and this wrong. I need you to call me out. If you see I'm doing this, if you see people are getting upset because I do this thing, you know, I'm not letting people talk, I'm not listening enough, I'm not, whatever it is. I need you to hit me across the head and say, knock it off. Because, you know, sometimes we don't realize we're doing the thing that, you know, we're not supposed to be doing.
Two things that I can take out of your advices is this story of preparation, because we tend to forget as human beings we have a tendency to go autopilot, led by emotions, impressions. So if you have the conversation without preparation, without writing, while you're writing, in fact, your cognitive part of your brain is awake, so that it makes you reflect into some objective solution and not something that is completely subjective. And the second point that I keep with myself is this story about accountability partner, which fortunately, I have also the opportunity to call one of my pals who is in more or less in the same area as me, and I can discuss stuff. And he's the one who will give me some slaps or sometimes a punch in the face to wake me up. Chris, these are awesome tips, by the way. I wanted to get back because it's close to 1 year that you have published the book, The Power of Company Culture, how any business can build a culture that improves productivity, performance, and profit. And I wanted to understand. So, as a leader, why would I read your book?
Well, I guess if you would like to have higher profits, better productivity, higher performance, that those might be three good reasons. If you'd like work to not suck as much or make your people a lot happier, that might be another great reason. But I think probably the third thing is I actually give the third part of the book is all about change management. So it's all about how you get people to change. So even if you don't care about anything I had to say about culture and any of the research and the case studies we did with some with NASA and VaynerMedia and all these great companies, the last part just by itself will help you in anything else that you're doing, any other change that you're trying to create in the organization. That will teach you how to get that done in a way that is very clear, very concise, very understandable, and will save you so many headaches. You will owe me all kinds of money for all the aspirin you don't have to buy anymore, because I make change management easy for organizations.
I love that, Chris, by the way. I think that change management needs a little bit of a disruption. It makes like 25 years that people are living out of this book and these consultants from ADCAR, this change management framework. Back in my corporate days, we used to this model called ADCAR. And I think it's time to change a little bit the vision, that we make it a little bit more pragmatic, especially that the expectations about culture have changed drastically for since
Mm.
20, 25 years ago, really a lot. And the need for more human-centric leaders, more conscious leadership, it is higher than ever. The expectation of people at work are changing and they are ready to leave. It's not anymore like in my generation that they were there for the good money, the good reputation of the company. Now they can say, fuck off, I need to do something with purpose. And companies should learn how to drive this type of big changes at work.
Yeah, yeah.
Chris, it was really lovely to have a discussion with you from sunny California, right? Did I miss it?
Yes, yes.
Is that sunny? No, not now.
It's very sunny. We say it's cold, but it's like 58 degrees Fahrenheit, which you would not call cold at all. So yeah, but it's been very windy. We have the not near me, about an hour away is in LA. We have the big fires right now,
Mm.
from all the wind. But here it's just windy and a little bit cold. But yeah, probably compared to where you're at, it's quite sunny.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Chris, for your time. I would really recommend to our audience to go and take a version of The Power of Company Culture, the book of Chris Dyer. Thank you for the excellent conversation, Chris.
Thank you so much.